The storm was fierce that evening, with rain slashing sideways against the windows of the old, dimly lit house. The wind howled, a relentless force, pushing against the earth as if trying to tear everything from its path. The streets were empty, save for the occasional flicker of a street lamp battling against the darkness. The sound of thunder echoed in the distance, booming like the earth itself had cracked in half. Inside the house, the air was thick with the scent of wet wood, damp carpets, and the promise of something unknown. Shadows clung to every corner, stretching long and silent, as though they too were waiting for something to happen. It was a night like any other, a night where the world seemed to hold its breath, teetering on the edge of something monumental. In the corner of the room, amidst the stillness, a figure stood, its silhouette barely visible against the dim light. Max. He was just a dog, a stray with a rough past and a coat worn by the hardships of life. His fur, a patchwork of browns and whites, was soaked from the rain, clinging to his small, slender frame. His eyes, large and soulful, seemed to carry a weight that no one truly understood, not even him. But tonight, in the midst of the storm, Max wasn't just a stray. He was something more. Something that would change a life forever. And no one would ever truly understand why he did it. Max had always been an ordinary dog in every sense of the word. His days were spent wandering the city streets, searching for scraps of food, avoiding the hustle and bustle of human life. He had no owner, no family to call his own. He was used to being alone, and yet there was always a quiet determination in him. It wasn't until this night, this stormy night, that he would find his purpose. There, in that darkened corner of the world, Max heard a sound, a cry, soft, broken, almost lost beneath the thunder. Something told him to go to it. And so, without question, he did. But why did Max choose this moment? Why did he choose to risk everything, to walk into the unknown for a stranger? If you believe in the power of kindness, stay with me until the end of this story. Because sometimes, the greatest acts of bravery come from the most unlikely places. Max was about to show the world what it meant to love, to fight for something greater than yourself, and to change the course of a stranger's life, without anyone ever knowing why. The storm raged outside. But inside, something extraordinary was about to unfold. It began on an ordinary day, the kind where the sun was neither too hot nor too cold, and everything seemed as it should be. Max wandered the streets of the city, as he often did, his paws tapping softly against the pavement. He had no real destination, no one waiting for him at home. He was, in a sense, just passing through life, moment by moment, with no grand plan and no particular purpose. The world was full of people hurrying from one place to another, their lives filled with their own concerns, unaware of the small, lonely dog that roamed their paths. Max had learned to stay out of their way, to avoid the attention of people who might ignore or shoo him away. His life, for all its simplicity, had its rhythms, finding food, finding shelter, keeping to the background. Yet, as Max walked, something changed. He paused, his ears flicking, as if something had caught his attention. A strange sound, a voice. It was faint, nearly drowned out by the noise of the traffic and the bustling crowds, but it was there. A cry, distant and filled with desperation. Max's heart quickened. His instincts, finely tuned from years of surviving on the streets, told him to investigate. He wasn't sure what it was, but something inside him told him that this cry was different. The sound of the cry called to him, even though he didn't fully understand why. It was a pull, a magnetic force that could not be ignored. Max had never been one to ignore a call for help, even if he didn't know exactly what was happening or who was in trouble. Without a second thought, Max darted down an alley, his small frame weaving between the trash cans and broken fences that lined the street. His paws moved with urgency, his nose twitching as he followed the faint scent that led him forward. The alley grew darker as he moved deeper into the abandoned part of the city, a place where the buildings were crumbling, and the streetlights had long since stopped working. Max didn't hesitate. He had heard that cry, and it was pulling him closer. The alley eventually opened up into a larger, forgotten courtyard, the kind of place people often avoided. And there, in the center of the courtyard, lying against a crumbling brick wall, was a woman. She was bruised, battered, and unconscious, her body crumpled as if she had been discarded carelessly. Blood stained her clothes, and the look on her face was one of utter helplessness. Max's heart raced. He rushed to her side without thinking, his tail stiff and his body tense. He nudged her gently with his nose, a soft whine escaping his throat. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confused at first, and then, slowly, they locked onto his. For a moment, she seemed to hesitate, as though unsure whether she was dreaming. Her hand, shaking, reached out toward him. Max stood still, watching her with quiet understanding in his eyes. She was in pain, but she wasn't alone anymore. Max had found her. The woman's breath was shallow, each gasp for air a battle against the pain that racked her body. She raised her hand and stroked Max's fur, her fingers trembling. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How did you find me?" Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to help. But the woman wasn't the only one in danger. Max's ears perked up, his body tense as the sounds of footsteps echoed in the distance. The slow, deliberate shuffle of several men was growing closer. They weren't in a hurry. They were sure of themselves. They knew exactly where they were going. Max's gaze shifted toward the sound, and then back to the woman. She was too weak to move on her own. She needed help, and she needed it now. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Max's heart pounded in his chest. Without thinking, he stepped in front of the woman, positioning himself between her and the approaching men. His muscles tensed, every hair on his body standing on end. There was no retreat, no turning back. This was it. The first man stepped into the courtyard. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that flickered with a cold, calculating intent. He looked at Max, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. The other men followed, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. They weren't afraid of a dog. But Max wasn't backing down. His body was low to the ground, his teeth bared in a silent warning. He stood strong, the only thing standing between the woman and the men who meant her harm. "You think you can stop us, dog?" the leader of the group mocked, his voice thick with scorn. Max didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He simply growled, the sound deep and low in his chest, echoing like thunder. The men laughed again, more out of amusement than fear. They advanced, thinking they could just shove the dog aside. But Max wasn't some helpless animal. He had been on the streets long enough to know how to protect himself, and, more importantly, how to protect those who needed him most. With a sudden lunge, Max sprang forward, his jaws snapping shut on the man's ankle. The man yelped in surprise, stumbling backward. The others hesitated for just a moment, shocked by the dog's unexpected ferocity. But that moment was enough. Max wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the woman's life. And he was prepared to risk everything to protect her. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Max's body was a blow of motion as he darted and snapped, his growls filled with determination. The men, momentarily thrown off by his speed and unpredictability, were forced to retreat, stumbling backward in panic. They hadn't expected a dog to be the one standing in their way. But Max didn't stop. He kept his position, never once moving away from the woman he had sworn to protect. He stood there, his body tense and ready, waiting for them to make another move. The men backed off, their faces filled with disbelief, but they knew they couldn't take him on, not like this. Max had won. The men, realizing they had no chance against the dog, turned and fled, their footsteps fading into the night. Max watched them go, his body still trembling with adrenaline. Only then did he allow himself to relax, his tail slowly wagging. The woman, who had been silent through it all, looked at Max with wide eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it held a depth of gratitude and wonder. "Why? Why did you do it? Why did you save me?" Max's gaze met his eyes filled with something unspoken, a bond that had been formed in the heat of danger, a trust that had been built without words. Max didn't need to explain. He had done it because, in that moment, he knew that this was what he was meant to do. To save her. To fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves. And he would stay with her until help arrived, never leaving her side. The silence that followed was unlike any other. The chaos had passed, and all that remained in the aftermath was a quiet calm, broken only by the faint hum of the storm in the distance. Max, still standing guard over the woman, his body weary but unyielding, knew the danger had passed. For now, they were safe. But what did that really mean? Safety, to Max, had always been an illusion. As a stray, his life had always been on the edge of survival. There was never any guarantee of warmth, food, or kindness. Yet, in this moment, surrounded by the broken remnants of the world around them, Max had found something greater than just survival. He had found purpose, and he had given it all for a stranger. The woman, slowly regaining her strength, managed to sit up, her eyes wide with both fear and gratitude. The pain that had gripped her moments before had dulled, and she reached out with trembling hands to stroke Max's fur once more. Her voice was shaky, still uncertain from the shock of it all. "Why did you do it?" she asked again, her words barely more than a whisper. Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. The woman could sense that. There were no words that could explain what had happened, no grand justification, no reasoning to give. He had done it because he knew it was the right thing to do. And that, in itself, was enough. Max's eyes, warm and steady, told her everything. He was not a hero in the way stories often described. He wasn't a grand, noble figure. But he was, in every sense of the word, brave. He had acted not out of any desire for recognition, but out of pure instinct, love, and loyalty. A loyalty not to a person, but to the fundamental idea that sometimes, kindness is a risk worth taking. Help arrived shortly thereafter, the sound of sirens approaching as the woman's breath steadied, her wounds treated with care. She was alive, and though she was hurt, she was going to make it. The paramedics looked over the scene with concern, but their attention quickly shifted to Max, who stood beside the woman, ever watchful. One of the paramedics, a young man with a soft smile, knelt beside Maximum. "Good boy," he said softly, his voice full of awe and respect. "You saved her." The woman, now sitting upright with the help of the paramedics, turned to Max with tears in her eyes. "He saved me," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. "He didn't have to. But he did." Max's ears twitched at the sound of her words, and he nudged her gently with his nose, as if to reassure her. He didn't need gratitude, though it warmed his heart all the same. He had simply done what needed to be done, and that was enough for him. As the paramedics worked to stabilize her and prepare her for transport, the woman's eyes never left Maximum. "You're not just a dog," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You're my guardian angel." Max sat beside her, his posture relaxed but alert, watching the paramedics move with practiced efficiency. His tail, once still, now wagged gently at the words. He wasn't sure he fully understood the term guardian angel, but he knew he had done something important. Something that had changed the course of this woman's life forever. The woman's name, as the paramedics would later find out, was Sarah. She was a young woman, living a life that had been marked by hardship and struggle. That night, she had been walking home from work when she had been attacked, left in the alley with no one to help her. But then Max had appeared, like a miracle in the form of a stray dog, simple, unassuming, and yet, in that moment, everything. Word spread quickly. The story of the dog who had saved a woman's life touched the hearts of everyone who heard it. News outlets picked up the story, sharing it across social media platforms. But even as people marveled at Max's bravery, Sarah knew the truth. Max didn't do it for fame or recognition. He had done it because, deep down, he had a heart as pure as any human's. In the days that followed, Sarah struggled to process what had happened. She had lost so much: family, friends, a sense of safety. But now, in the wake of this terrifying night, she had gained something precious. A second chance at life. And a friend in the most unexpected of places. Max, for his part, returned to his wandering. But he was no longer just a stray. He was a hero, though he didn't know it. To Sarah, though, he was so much more. He was family. Max would visit Sarah every day after that. He would walk with her down the same streets they had walked before, but now there was a sense of warmth, of connection, that hadn't been there before. She would feed him, and they would sit together in the park, watching the world go by, as if nothing had ever happened. But both of them knew the bond between them had changed everything. And the world, too, had changed. The story of Max's courage was shared, not just because of what he had done, but because it reminded people of something important. that even in the darkest, most desperate times, there is still hope. There is still kindness. And there is always a reason to believe in the goodness of others. Max had risked his life for a stranger, not because he was asked to, but because he knew, deep down, it was the right thing to do. His actions reminded the world that sometimes, the greatest acts of bravery are not about grand gestures, but about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. Max was not just a dog. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can change the world. If you've ever witnessed or experienced something like this, share your story below. Your words can inspire someone today, just as Max's story has inspired so many. If you believe in the power of love, bravery, and kindness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are always more stories like Max's, stories that remind us of the goodness still in the world. Max, the little dog who risked everything, taught us all that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage come in the most unexpected forms. And they don't need to be explained. They just need to be felt. The storm may pass, but the light it leaves behind can last a lifetime.